Good morning. We are here today to discuss the fifth Sefer of the Torah, the new Sefer, Sefer Devarim, with Parshas Devarim as the opening. We are also going to be discussing some about Tish'a of today as well, as indeed this is Shabbos Chazon, and Sunday is Motzei Shabbos, really beginning Tish'a B'Av. The title for today's class is Harnessing a Powerful Nation. This month, the month of Av, is sponsored by Chaimi and Dana Gutman in honor of the entire Zweig family and in appreciation for their dedication to our local and national Jewish communities and their dissemination of authentic Torah learning. I know Chaimi and Dana for many, many years. Chaimi and I have been in many, many, many classes together for already a couple of decades, and he's an awesome person, an attorney that lives in Aventura. And he and his family are a really essential part of our yeshiva community, of their community in Aventura. And we are honored by their sponsorship and wish them and their family, their children, tremendous blessing in all manners. And we thank them for their dedication and our support of us in every way. I would be remiss in not mentioning that for a little while we had a problem getting all of our shiurim on podcast form, and Chaimi very strongly encouraged me to make sure that we resolve that issue, and I thank him for that, as it really is supremely helpful in so many ways. So as I mentioned, the shiur title is Harnessing a Powerful Nation. This month, which is the month of Av, at the beginning of it, we know is quite sad. The rabbinic principle is that when the month of Av enters, we're supposed to decrease in our simcha, in our happiness. The good news is that one of the happiest days of the year is just about 2 weeks away, called Tu B'Av. But for today, we're going to talk about how can we go from this diminished happiness and then ultimately mourning the destruction of so many tragic events in our Jewish history, to go from that to a state of great happiness. So here's a little bit of a commentary as an opening. One of the most exasperating aspects of the recent upward surge of anti-Semitism is the absolute absurdity of the victims being painted as the aggressors. Of course, adding fuel to that conflagration of inanity is that when the Jews successfully repel and vanquish their enemies, the Jews are again chastened by many for their successes. Ironically, here is a powerful, frank, and brief rebuttal to this nonsense by a most remarkable advocate, the Prime Minister of Poland, Donald Tusk. How ironic is that? He is quoted that the Prime Minister of Poland says, "How can 500 million Europeans ask 300 million Americans to protect them from 140 million Russians?" Then he adds, "But I'll tell you something even more astonishing. There are 2 billion Muslims asking the world to protect them from 7 million Jews." That is kind of an incredible take on everything that's been happening since October 7th. So again, specifically, Tusk noted 500 million Europeans are asking 300 million Americans to defend themselves against 140 million Russians. He made this statement ahead of a summit on Ukraine in London and emphasized that Europe needed to take greater responsibility for the continent's security rather than relying heavily on the United States for defense. Tusk's comments highlighted the need for Europe to become a stronger, more self-reliant entity on the global stage, capable of addressing its security challenges without excessive dependence on external partners. Now that just makes sense, but when Israel does that, somehow we're doing something wrong. The fact that the Jewish people and the state of Israel have so powerfully repelled their enemies is nothing short of astounding. It behooves all of us Jewish people at this time to ask ourselves, how did October 7th happen? How were we able to successfully rebound? And how can we be sure that these atrocities never again occur? So we're going to begin with the Parsha overview and hopefully get to talking in detail about that question, but we're also going to talk about not only our Jewish nation, but our personal lives as it relates to learning lessons from the past and doing better in the future. So Sefer Devarim opens with Elah HaDevarim. These are the words that Moshe spoke to the Jewish people in Transjordan, that means on the east side of the Jordan. And the Torah points out that this location is actually only an 11-day journey from Mount Sinai, but yet the Jewish people were wandering 40 years in the desert. And in this 40th year, in the 11th month, which is the final 30, 40 days of Moshe Rabbeinu's life, that's when Moshe Rabbeinu speaks all of these words. And he specifically speaks them after destroying Sichon, the king of the Amori, Og, the king of the Bashan. And that's when Moshe begins to explain this Torah. Now, there's an interesting argument here. I'm going to continue with the overview, but I just want to mention briefly this word Moshe begins to explain this Torah. The word in Hebrew is ho'il. Rashi says it means that he begins. He began to explain the Torah, and Ramban says he wanted to begin to explain the Torah. So there's that difference. And the reason Ramban says that is because, as we're now going to see, Moshe Rabbeinu does not discuss the Torah at this point. That doesn't happen until Parshas Va'eschanan, where he begins to talk about the giving of the Torah, the Ten Commandments, the Shema Yisrael, and fundamentals of the Torah. Then many other of the mitzvos of Sefer Devarim are enumerated from that point forward. So Moshe is in Transjordan. It's in the 11th month of this final year. He's about to pass away. And it says Moshe wanted, or did, yes, begin to explain this Torah. And then Moshe says, listen, people, Hashem spoke to us at Mount Sinai. And he said, you've been here enough time. Rashi says it means you have achieved greatness and much reward at this time. You have become a nation. You made a tabernacle. You received the Torah. You appointed a Sanhedrin. You became a great nation. Now go travel and inherit Eretz Yisrael. And says Rashi that Moshe Rabbeinu was telling them, had they simply followed this pattern of achieving greatness and going to Eretz Yisrael, they would have successfully vanquished all of their enemies without lifting a weapon. They would have entered Eretz Yisrael so strongly, with such impressive strength and brilliance, they would not have needed even to wage any wars. But what happened? The Jewish people decided to send spies. And then the Torah goes on for many sentences saying why they decided to send the spies, and that Moshe Rabbeinu acceded to their request. And then they came back, the spies, and they convinced the people that they cannot go up, and the people were complaining in their tents. Welcome to Tish'a B'Av. That's when that happened. And they refused to go, and then Hashem got angry at them, and then there was the 40 years in the desert, and the plague that happened at that time. And the bottom line is, we now had to wander in the desert for 40 years. And we traveled all around, and then eventually, towards the end of that journey, we came to Seir and to Moab, and the Torah then recounts the successful wars against Sichon and Og that happened just in these last parashios in Sefer B'Midbar, as we read. And then, of course, the Sefer B'Midbar concludes. And here Moshe Rabbeinu is recounting this history. And then Moshe Rabbeinu tells them that we were so successful in conquering all this territory, from Ammon, from Sichon, and from Og. And then we took over that land, and the children of Bnei Gad and Reuven also took a bunch of that land. And we're going to then cross the Yarden and fight in Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, Parshas Devarim concludes with, I commanded Yoshua at that time, you saw all that we did victoriously over these kings, so Hashem will do to all the kingdoms that you encounter on the other side of the Yarden. Do not be afraid of them, because Hashem will battle for you. And that's the end of Parshas Devarim. So it's a very interesting setup. The Torah is very clear at the beginning that Moshe Rabbeinu wants to speak the Torah, or does, according to Rashi, begin explaining the Torah, but then he doesn't seem to actually do so. And then he goes into a long history of the sin of the spies, the wandering in the desert, and the successful wars at the end, and admonishing Yoshua to be careful, that not to be afraid of these enemies, because Hashem is fighting for them. So what I'd like to do is ask the question, why is Moshe Rabbeinu talking about explaining the Torah and then not explaining it? And why does the Torah make a big emphasis over the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu told them, right after he says that Moshe Rabbeinu explains the Torah, the immediate thing he says is that Hashem said, you became great at this mountain. You became a powerful nation at this mountain. What does that have to do with explaining the Torah? And why is that the way Moshe Rabbeinu starts his long speech to the Jewish people regarding the sin of the spies and the vanquishing of those enemies, and then eventually going into Eretz Yisrael? Okay, so that's a good overview question. A couple more questions. Why is the name of this Sefer Devarim? The word Devarim means words or matters or things. Now, over here, it certainly seems to mean words. The whole Torah are words. The entire Torah is words. So why should this Sefer specifically be called words? What's the difference between these words and any other words? That's question number 2. And then in order to explain questions number 3 and 4, we need to know a commentary of the rabbis brought in most part by Rashi, and it's a Sifri. Sifri is the Midrash commentary of the Tanaim to Sefer B'Midbar and Devarim. Over here we're talking about the Sifri on Devarim, number 2, and this is what the Sifri says. The Sifri says that here Moshe Rabbeinu is giving the Jewish people rebuke, and Moshe Rabbeinu learned from Yaakov Avinu that a person does not give rebuke until the end of their lifetime. A person should only give rebuke at the end of their lifetime. And so this is what we are taught, that Moshe rebuked them only close to his death. As we mentioned, this is just about 30, 40 days away from Moshe Rabbeinu's death. From whom did Moshe Rabbeinu learn this concept of giving rebuke close to death? The answer is from Yaakov, who rebuked his sons only close to his death, as it is written, and Yaakov called to his sons, and he said, gather together, and I will reveal to you what will happen to you in the end of days. Reuven, you are my firstborn son. And then he proceeded to tell him about how he's fast like water. Let me tell you why I did not rebuke you all these years. Because if I would have rebuked you all of these years earlier, I said you would leave me and go stick to Esav, my brother. And so therefore I did not rebuke you earlier, says Yaakov to Reuven. Okay, and because of 4 things, that's very, very important, please listen. Because of 4 things, says the Sifri, a person should not rebuke anyone only close to his death. And it says not rebuke anyone. Number 1, the reason that he should not rebuke him except close to death is so that he should not need to rebuke him again and again, not need to rebuke repeatedly. Because if he rebukes and the person fails, then he rebukes him again and he fails, etc. No, don't do it again and again, one time before death. Number 2, because if he rebukes him earlier, so then the person who received the rebuke will be ashamed in front of the person who rebuked him. He'll experience shame. That's number 2. Number 3, so that the person who's rebuked does not bear a grudge in his heart, that he won't be resentful the whole lifetime of the rebuker, because he's not rebuking him until death. So in order to avoid that resentment, don't rebuke until death. Now, here's a very key point. Number 4, according to the translation, which I'm going to call out Sefaria here for literally perverting and corrupting the translation of the Sifri, it's just horrifying to me. I don't know how they get away with it, so to speak. According to the Sefaria translation of the Sifri, what the Sifri says for reason number 4 is so that the rebuked person should not leave him and go elsewhere. But that's not at all what the Hebrew says, which I'll read to you in a moment. According to the Sefaria translation, reason number 4 is so that the rebuke should not leave him and go elsewhere. Now, I understand why they say that, because that is what Yaakov says to Reuven. But the actual words of the Sifri is that reason number 4 to rebuke a person close to death is so that he should take his leave from him with shalom, with harmony. Shehatochacha mevia lidei shalom, because rebuke brings to harmony. Tochacha, rebuke, admonishment, chastisement, whatever word you want to use in English, brings to shalom, to harmony. That's reason number 4 in the Hebrew translation. Sefaria actually has 2 translations, and in both translations they pervert this to mean that that he should not bear a grudge, so that he should not leave him and go elsewhere. Okay. Rabbi Chiel, remind me at the end, we'll talk about your question if you don't feel like it's answered. So we have a big problem because according to the Hebrew translation, Tochacha actually brings to shalom. So now let's ask questions 3 and 4. Question number 1 is, if a person waits until the end of life to dispense rebuke, how can they help the person that needs the rebuke? It just seems insane. For decades and decades, a parent or a friend does not rebuke their friend until it's time for dying. Okay, but isn't the whole purpose to help the person? So if you don't rebuke them until the end of life, how are you going to help them the whole life? That's question number 3. And finally, question number 4, according to the actual words of the Sifri, the 4th reason is that Tochacha brings to shalom, and therefore we want them to take leave from each other b'shalom, so therefore wait until death. But if it brings shalom, why are you waiting until death? Have the shalom earlier. Isn't that an obvious question? And because that question is so obvious, the Sefaria just completely says it doesn't mean that. It means something totally different, which it doesn't say in the words. So those are our questions. Again, just to remind everyone so that we have it in mind. Why does the Torah say here that Moshe thoroughly explained the Torah if that doesn't happen until later, until the Sanan and beyond? Question number 2, why is it called Sefer Devarim, words? The whole entire Torah is Devarim, words. And number 3, if a person waits until the end of life to dispense rebuke, how can they possibly help the person that needs the rebuke? And number 4, the translation of the Sifri that we mentioned is a corruption. And so the translation says, so that the rebuke not leave him and go elsewhere, but the Hebrew says, if indeed rebuke, the Hebrew says that they should take leave from one another with shalom, because tochacha, rebuke, brings shalom, harmony. And so if that's the case, indeed, question number 4 is, why not rebuke during the lifetime in order to bring harmony? So what I'd like to do in order to begin answering these questions is to explain what happens when a person gives rebuke and what can happen without, so to speak, rebuke. In other words, if it's true, what the rabbis are saying in the Sifri, that Moshe learns from our forefather Yaakov, that a person should not rebuke until close to death, what should the posture be throughout the lifetime until that point? No conversations, you can have conversations, but don't do rebuke. How is that all supposed to work? So I would like to suggest that obviously there's different types of rebuke. And I'm going to now say that the Sifri and Moshe Rabbeinu and Yaakov were talking about one very specific kind or aspect of rebuke, and this is the aspect to be avoided until close to death, and then we'll explain what happens during the lifetime. One of the biggest problems that we as human beings suffer from is repeated mistakes or bad habits. Can everybody agree with me? That's a problem. We say, how did I do that again? How did I overeat again? How did I say the wrong thing again? How did I not take care of my teeth again before I went to the dentist, etc., etc., etc.? Everybody agree with me? Okay. So what actually helps a person to change? And that's the multi-billion-dollar question, because if we could just synopsize an answer to that and package it and sell it, we probably would make a lot of money. So one of the major things that helps a person to change is getting a new perspective on how things should be done and feeling empowered to do things differently. I don't say that that always works, but that can help and that can work. And I suggest that that first way is the kind of the scope of what the conversations that a potential rebuker should have to the people that they love. So if we want to help our child, our friend. We could give the rebuke called type B, which we're going to explain in a second. But type A, which is the rebuke that should happen during a person's lifetime, is to avoid making the person feel horrible and ashamed. What we can do is help them learn another perspective, another approach. You're having difficulty waking up in the morning. Let me see if we can help you figure out how to go to sleep earlier, et cetera, right? Let me give you another perspective, perhaps on how life can be done differently if you're willing, and you decide what you're going to do. We could call that a form of chastisement, but really it's not at all a bitter pill. It's more of an empowerment speech, which is a beautiful way to help people. We're going to call that rebuke type A. Now here's rebuke type B, and it is often what happens in a person's own consciousness, even without rebuke. It's called hitting rock bottom. Well, what is hitting rock bottom? Hitting rock bottom isn't so much you hit rock bottom. Hitting rock bottom is the internalization of the recognition of failure, and I don't want to fail again, and I'm going to do everything I can to avoid failing again. But most of the time, people sell themselves on the idea that they didn't really fail so badly, because it really hurts to admit how badly we have failed. So internalizing failure is a tremendous medicine for avoiding the repetition of mistakes. That's a tremendous antidote to repeating mistakes. So the root canal should help a lot to avoid more root canals. It should help a lot. But again, sometimes we rationalize, etc. But the real message of having been a failure in any regard should be a very powerful medicine to preventing future failure. So Tochacha part B, the type done before death, is not just, let me show you a different perspective, let's have a conversation how you can really achieve your potential. It's actually a message: you failed devastatingly, which is what Moshe Rabbeinu was here telling the Jewish people. You are 11 days away from entering the promised land, and you ended up with 40 years and all the generation dying. That is a horrific failure. But that's not something Moshe Rabbeinu tells them during the lifetime. So why is it so bad during the lifetime to tell a person that they failed? And the answer is, as Yaakov Avinu very explicitly tells his son Reuven, because most people don't accept a message that they failed from other people. What they do when they get that message from other people is they tend to walk away. That's exactly what Yaakov tells Reuven. You're going to go to Esav. You'll rationalize that I'm a bad guy, that your father Yaakov doesn't really care about you, that your father Yaakov is trying to control you, and that's why he's making me feel like a piece of you know what, and that because of that, I'm going to have to listen to everything he tells me from now on, and I won't have a life of my own. I'm going to go to Esav, who's going to make me feel like $1 million. That's what Reuven could rationalize, and that's what most people would rationalize. So telling someone that they failed, although it should really help a person, because if they internalize their failure, they're much more likely to avoid repetition of devastating mistakes. But telling that to a person while you're trying to maintain a relationship with them is not the thing to do. Because maintaining the relationship with them until the very end of life and encouraging them and showing them a different perspective and empowering them and keeping that relationship will ensure, number one, the viability of the relationship, which is critically important, and number two, that when the time comes to depart from one another, and then the message of you failed is given, so don't repeat the mistake again, will be accepted, because they're never going to see that person again. That's what's called close to death. And that will help the person even more. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu is doing here in Sefer Devarim. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu learned from Yaakov. Now, let me bring the proof. First of all, the translation of this fourth reason, let's go through the four reasons again. Reason number one is so that you shouldn't need to rebuke and repeatedly rebuke. That's what would happen if it was done during the lifetime. Number two is so that the other person should not be ashamed when they're seen again by the rebuker. Again, because the relationship is continuing. Number three is so that they should not bear resentment in their heart against that rebuker. Again, that would be during the lifetime. And number four, so that they should leave one another with shalom. Because when they're leaving one another and they maintain that relationship throughout their lifetime, then that rebuke can successfully land. That's the point of Sefer Devarim. Moshe Rabbeinu is motivated here in Sefer Devarim to teach the Jewish people the Torah, but through a very, very specific lens. Moshe Rabbeinu says, look, at Mount Sinai, here we are 11 days away from Sinai. Literally, it's an 11-day journey from where we stand now at the end of these 40 years. And you're about to enter Eretz Yisrael. And you could have entered 40 years ago. But you failed. And what happened at that time when we were at Mount Sinai is Hashem said, look, you guys have become an incredibly powerful nation. You are so great. You built the Mishkan. You received the Torah. You have a Sanhedrin. And I'm giving you all the blessings of increase as increasing the population as the Torah continues to describe over here. But instead of using that greatness and literally walking, kind of waltzing into Eretz Yisrael in undisturbed fashion, we failed ourselves. We began arguing. We began not trusting our leadership. We began thinking about replacing the leadership of Moshe and Aharon. We sent spies. We weren't sure if we wanted to enter. We chose to believe that it wouldn't be good for us to enter. All of this was a self-fulfilling prophecy of failure because we would have totally succeeded because we, in fact, are a very powerful and incredibly gifted nation, especially with the Torah. Because nothing is more powerful than a human being that has their head on straight and is clearly thinking, because that's how a human being was built to be in the image of Hashem. And a human being like that can be 7 million against 2 billion. That can happen. That does happen. It is happening in front of our eyes. We have that ability. But the Jewish people have again and again failed and failed and failed again. What lesson are we not learning? We're not taking responsibility for our failures. We're not internalizing what Moshe Rabbeinu is trying to have us internalize. This 40 years has become 2,000 years. That should not happen. And the reason it happens is because of hubris. It's because of the arrogance that we have, that we think we know, and that it's more important to read newspapers, to read books, to watch the media, to play games, to get money, than to learn the Torah, than to read the book. That's what we tell ourselves. And so Moshe Rabbeinu wants to teach us the Torah. He's here going to again explain to us the whole Torah. That's another name for the Sefer Devarim, is to repeat the Torah, Mishnah Torah. He's going to do that. But the most important thing he needs to tell us is, I can't teach you the Torah. The Torah will not help you if you refuse to learn from your failure. And you failed. That's what he's saying. You failed. And you know what? That's what all the prophets have been telling us since Moshe Rabbeinu. Yirmiyah, we're going to read about Yeshaya's prophecy on Shabbos, Chazon Yeshayahu Van Amotz, which we've talked about before, especially chapter 2, which you don't read this Shabbos, talks about how all the nations are going to stream to Jerusalem to know what the word of Hashem is. Ki mitzion tetzei Torah. And it begins, though, with the failure of the Jewish people, and the fact that we're continue to be in this exile, and we're not yet at that stage, is because we refuse to own up to having failed. So why did October 7th happen? It's very simple. Arrogance. We believed that we knew what we were doing. We believed that we could rely on our technology. We believed. but we didn't do the most important thing that Hashem says. Be clear-headed, be realistic, live in the image of Hashem, and you won't fool yourselves. You won't be in denial over the realities that you need to confront. We need the Torah for that. The minute that we start becoming like the nations of the world, thinking we understand how this all works and thinking we can figure it all out on our own, that we don't need the Torah to set us straight and to give us the minds of clarity that we so desperately actually do need, we can fail again. So whether it's not building families the correct way, not building society the correct way, or simply not having the wisdom of the Torah and Hashem and his help to guide us, all of that is what we need. And the minute we leave that to the side, out of our arrogance, that means we are refusing to acknowledge again that we are failing ourselves. It's all black and white in Sefer Devarim, and that is Moshe Rabbeinu's lesson here. I want to explain to you the Torah. You need the Torah. You desperately need the Torah. But just look, says Moshe Rabbeinu. You were 11 days away, and now it was 40 years. And at the end of this 40 years, look at the giants you just conquered. Look at what just happened. You were so afraid that you couldn't go into the land of Israel. Look, we just took this entire eastern part of the Jordan over the mightiest warriors that everybody was depending on. Look at what just happened. If you go into Eretz Yisrael again, and you wonder if you can, or if you wonder if Hashem will be with you, or you don't start making sure that you're following the precepts of the Torah, you're going to fail again. And by the way, that is a story that happens at the beginning of the conquest. Because of their encampment, there was a time that they didn't study Torah, and an angel came to chastise Yeshua over the Torah study that was not learned. Because we need to continue learning the Torah. The minute that we think we can leave the Torah to the side, and that's what I think is also such a huge problem in the state of Israel today. By the way, I understand why Haredim should have to fight. But learning Torah is not only for Haredim. That's the problem. Learning Torah is for everyone. It's not just for the Haredim. And I'm not saying that the fighting shouldn't also be with Haredim sometimes, somehow, in certain situations, whoever they are. The fact is that the Torah calling is for all the Jewish people. And all of the misguided notions of what we should do moving forward are only going to continue to get us into trouble if it's not truly seen through the lens of the Torah, how the Torah wants us to progress. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu desperately wants. He's trying. He wants to convey that to the people. So in our own, let me just, I'll get to our own personal lives in a second, but let me just take us through the questions. It doesn't happen until later that Moshe Rabbeinu explains the Torah because we need this preamble. The Torah will not work unless we are learning from our failure and willing to internalize how badly we failed. Also, why is it called Devarim? Because these are Moshe Rabbeinu's words. We're not just talking about the words of Torah and the words of Hashem. We're talking about Moshe Rabbeinu's words. What are Moshe Rabbeinu's words? Moshe Rabbeinu's words are, learn from your failure. That's the most important thing I can tell you so that you stop repeating the mistake. If a person waits to the end of life, how do they help the person during the life? Of course, you have conversations with your loved ones, helping them learn a new way, empowering them to behave differently. But if you try to call them on the fact that they failed, it is likely that they will leave the relationship. And the relationship is more important, and even more important than that is getting to that final conversation so that then they really can hear when you say you failed. Just like works by Reuven, and it works by other examples, Avraham and Avimelech, because even though it wasn't before Avraham died, it was actually, you'll see it in the transcript, it was actually the end of their relationship, and so therefore Avimelech was able to listen to Avraham. Moshe Rabbeinu does that here. David HaMelech does that in the future. Shlomo HaMelech. So there are many examples, and it works. And then, what does it mean that they should leave one another in harmony? It means that when the listener can internalize that the person telling me that they failed is a way of having me internalize so that I don't repeat the mistake that I've been repeating and ignoring my own failure and rationalizing all the things that we tend to do, then there really is shalom, and I see how much that person actually loved me and cares about me. And so that, I think, is a way to understand the opening of the Parsha, plus the whole entire speech that this Parsha does indicate how Moshe Rabbeinu is setting up how they can learn how successful they can be and how powerful the Jewish nation are, but only when it's through the lens of the Torah. So in our own personal lives, we have this question often about how to speak to the people that are closest to us. And the answer is in the most empowering and real ways without emphasizing the mistakes and the failures and how much they've set themselves back. Or, God forbid, even worse would be what they did to us when they failed, right? That would be even worse. Instead, we should focus on empowering them, which, by the way, is another form of tochacha. The word tochacha has the word koach in it, and I think that's a beautiful way to understand tochacha, is to actually help a person clarify what their strengths are and how they can be empowered to behave well for themselves and succeed in the future. But the other kind of tochacha, the kind that Yaakov tells Reuven, for example, is you failed when you were hastened like water and you lost so much of the position that I was going to give you. That's a total focus on the loss, but it's a way of getting Reuven to really not only own up, but to internalize that so that he doesn't do so again in the future. And the same thing with his tribe, as opposed to Shimon and Levi, Rebbe Chiel, where what Yaakov Avinu says is that they diminished his ability to be successful with the nations that were around him. I think that that's not really the ultimate of the failure. The ultimate of the failure was how they let themselves down, but maybe more on that another time. And so we should be careful to always maintain the relationship. We definitely don't want to encourage a person to walk away. But unlike Sepharia that says that that's the fourth reason, that's the whole reason for all the reasons. All four reasons are in order to continue to maintain the relationship, because the relationship is eminently valuable, and therefore we use our words and we use our conversations to encourage the people that are closest to us to have a different perspective, to have a different way of acting so that they can be more successful, all the time avoiding how badly they failed. But in this last conversation, if it's necessary, I'm not saying it's always necessary, if it is necessary, that is the time to tell a person that they failed, because now the relationship is concrete. Now the relationship will not change. Now they will not see each other again, and they'll be able to live with the rebuke and hopefully never change again, meaning never fail again. So as we enter Tish'a B'Av, of course, we are in Galus, and we've been in Galus for a long time. And us Jews tend to repeat our mistakes again and again. If we want to know the answer of how to not fail again, the first thing is to recognize that we did fail. The second thing is to recognize that the only way we will succeed is through the lens of the Torah. And all the questions that we have about what the Jews ought to do now is contained in the Torah. God willing, we'll get into some of that next week. Shabbos Nachamu coming up, Be'ezras Hashem. But in the meantime, we can be assured that the words of the Torah are here to guide us. The Torah word itself means guide, but we need to adhere to the words of the Torah and not to think that we know best. Okay, any questions or comments?
Thanks, Akiba. See you next week. Bye, everybody.
Bye, Rhoda. Always a pleasure.
How do you communicate with someone who you do believe has failed?
So,
And you think it's important for them to know that, but you're not at the end of your relationship with them. So how will you go about that?
so I'm coming from the point of view that I think most people do know that they failed, but that they are in a state of denial. I'm starting with that premise, not with the fact that they just don't know because they have no awareness of it at all. So from that premise, I would say that a way to help a person, the language to use is, I don't know if you're particularly, pleased with everything that's happened until now. I was thinking of some ideas, if you would like to discuss, of ways of being more successful. and just leaving whatever happened happen. And even more to the point, I would say, if they bring up, but I can't, and it was just so terrible, and what I did was so awful, or whatever, you say, look, that's not, we don't live in the past. We're not here to discuss the past. We're here to discuss the future. That generally is very helpful for people, and it's empowering, and it also can help them get over their self-defeatist mindset, which is another tool of the evil inclination, right? Because that completely exonerates them. One of the worst things that happens, and really I should have mentioned this before, and Joseph Rackman pointed this out to me today, so really excellently. Sometimes we will tell them that they failed, and then tell ourselves, what can I do? I told them. And the relationship is now damaged or over. And so what we do is we self-righteously end the relationship so that we can be exonerated ourselves from further responsibility to help them. Also a terrible trick that we do. Well, I told them, like, there's nothing else. Obviously, this person can't be helped. I told them they failed. They're not listening. They're so stupid. Okay, I'm done. Or they're done. Or we're both done. But either way, that's the wrong approach, because we need to fight for the relationship so that we can continue to encourage them and have us be in their lives to help them.
I've never thought of it that way. It's avoidance through confrontation.
Yeah. 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 It's a great point, I think. Yeah. A great point. Kudos to Joseph. Yeah. Anyone else? All right. So hopefully everyone will zoom on over to my father in a few minutes, and everybody should have an easy, meaningful, and impactful Tish'a B'Av. We should feel the pain of our failure, recognize the October 7th, the Holocaust, all the other terrible things of history. There have been so many, too many to enumerate, even since the Holocaust. And God willing, we should pass through this Tish'a B'Av, but hopefully a true Geula Shlema, maybe on Tish'a B'Av or earlier. Yes, God willing, Shira on Friday, God willing. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. You too.